Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, June 15th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. In Riverside, we are expecting a high of 89.7 degrees today with a low of 64.2. It is going to be quite warm, so please remember to grab some water and find a cool spot if you are heading out. Now let us take a look at what we are covering in today's show. We are breaking down the specific details contained within the recent peace agreement established between the United States and Iran. We are also analyzing the political implications for the future of Mitch McConnell's Senate seat following his most recent hospital visit. We will also keep you updated on several other major headlines making an impact today. All that and so much more is coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. A major development out of Washington and Tehran this morning. President Donald Trump says a landmark peace deal has been reached with Iran, aiming to end more than 3 months of devastating war. It's being called the Islamabad Memorandum. For more, we're joined by our reporter Ethan. Good morning, Ethan.
Good morning, Grace. Yes, this is being described as a landmark agreement mediated by Pakistan and Qatar after intensive shuttle diplomacy. According to CNBC and CBS News, the official signing ceremony is set for Friday, June 19th, just 4 days from today, in Geneva, Switzerland. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif confirmed the memorandum follows more than 14 hours of continuous talks in Tehran.
14 straight hours. So what exactly does this agreement do on day one?
The headline is an immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, and that's the language used in the memorandum itself. President Trump announced on social media that he's authorized what he called the toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, along with the immediate removal of the U.S. naval blockade of Iranian ports. The Associated Press, reporting via PBS NewsHour, says the U.S. will begin mine removal operations and energy shipments are expected to resume within 30 days. That alone could ease pressure at the gas pump globally.
And how are both sides framing this politically?
Quite differently, actually. Iranian state television displayed banners asserting that, quote, the U.S. was forced to sign an agreement, end quote. Meanwhile, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance described the deal as, quote, a great thing for the American people, end quote, pointing to the potential for lower energy costs. So each side is selling victory at home, which is pretty typical in these moments.
Let's talk money. I understand frozen Iranian assets are part of this.
That's right. Reports from Al Jazeera and the Times of Israel suggest the deal includes the eventual release of roughly $24 billion to $25 billion in frozen Iranian assets. About half of that could be released up front as a gesture of good faith. But Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was careful to note, quote, no money will be released to Iran until they perform, end quote. So there are conditions attached, and the timing of those payments will be closely watched.
What about the bigger questions, like Iran's nuclear program?
That's where things get genuinely complicated. The signing kicks off a 60-day window for what they're calling technical talks. Those talks will address the nuclear program and a proposed $300 billion reconstruction plan for Iran. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, Iran currently possesses 440.9 kilograms, or about 972 pounds, of uranium enriched to 60% purity. That's just a short technical step from the 90% you'd need for weapons-grade material.
So where is all that uranium right now?
It's believed to be buried under 3 nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. All 3 were severely damaged by U.S. and Israeli airstrikes earlier in the conflict, so we're essentially talking about uranium under rubble. Experts quoted by PBS NewsHour and the IAEA have proposed some remarkable verification mechanisms to deal with that, including remote handling units, basically robotic platforms, to extract uranium canisters from the collapsed sites.
Robotic recovery sounds like science fiction. Is there more?
There is, and it gets more exotic. Mediators have suggested using muon tomography, which essentially uses cosmic ray particles to see through the debris and confirm no hidden stockpiles exist within the collapsed bunkers. But beyond the technology, there's a real diplomatic rift over what to do with the uranium itself. President Trump has called for the stockpile to be destroyed or removed, potentially to Russia, while Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi insists the uranium be, quote, diluted, end quote, internally to a lower enrichment level. That disagreement hasn't been resolved.
Critics are already comparing this to the old 2015 nuclear deal. Does it stack up?
That's a sharp question, and the answer from analysts isn't flattering. Some Republicans and members of the Israeli government argue the terms don't improve on the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Analysis from the Washington Post and Al Monitor indicates the 2026 memorandum may actually leave the West in a weaker position. Under the old deal, Iran's enrichment was capped at 3.67%, with a breakout time of about 1 year. Today, with that 60% enriched stockpile, breakout time is estimated at just 1 to 2 weeks.
That's a striking gap. Now, the agreement claims the war has ended on all fronts. Is that actually holding in Lebanon?
That's the deal's biggest vulnerability right now. The Associated Press reports the agreement includes a ceasefire in Lebanon, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has explicitly stated the agreement, quote, does not bind, end quote, Israel. According to CBS News, the Israel Defense Forces continued to strike Hezbollah infrastructure in Beirut, even as negotiations were being finalized. Netanyahu told President Trump that Israel would not withdraw its troops from Lebanon or stop responding to Hezbollah attacks.
So how do mediators bridge that gap?
Qatar and Pakistan are reportedly trying to facilitate separate meetings in Doha to reconcile the U.S.-Iran agreement with Israel's security demands. Analysts are calling this the legitimacy gap, and they consider it the single greatest threat to the deal holding. If Israel keeps striking, and Iran feels obligated to respond through proxies, the whole framework could unravel before the ink is dry.
Let's step back to the human cost. This war began on February 28th, just over 3.5 months ago. What are we looking at?
The toll has been staggering. The conflict began with strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and estimates now suggest between 7,400 and 10,000 people have died. That includes thousands of Iranians and at least 15 U.S. service members. And the economic damage rippled worldwide almost immediately, particularly through energy markets.
Speaking of that, how badly did this hit the global economy?
Very badly. CNBC reported that U.S. annual inflation hit 4.2% in May, the highest in 3 years. Oil prices peaked at $126 per barrel during the worst of the fighting. The effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz created severe supply constraints for gas and fertilizers, and economists were openly warning about global stagflation. So reopening that strait is genuinely consequential for households everywhere.
And politically, this can't be easy at home for either leader, right?
Not at all. In Iran, hardline figures have been protesting in cities like Mashhad, arguing the deal strips Tehran of its leverage over the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has urged national unity, calling those who label negotiators as, quote, traitors, end quote, a, quote, disgrace, end quote. So there's real internal friction in Tehran over whether they gave up too much.
What about here in the United States?
The Trump administration is clearly pushing for a swift exit from the war ahead of the upcoming midterm elections. The president has framed the deal as a total success, declaring that, quote, the deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran is now complete, end quote. But analysts note that the 60-day technical window essentially defers the hardest non-proliferation questions until after the elections, which is politically convenient but substantively risky.
So as of today, June 15th, where does that leave us?
In a fragile but meaningful de-escalation, Grace, the big war between the U.S. and Iran does appear to be winding down, and that's significant for global markets and for the families of service members. But the region remains on edge. The success of the Islamabad Memorandum really hinges on those upcoming technical negotiations, and on whether Washington can contain the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. The next 60 days will tell us whether this is a genuine turning point or just a pause.
Ethan, terrific reporting on a fast-moving story. Thanks so much for walking us through it.
My pleasure, Grace.
We're following developing news out of Washington this morning about Senator Mitch McConnell, who remains hospitalized after a medical emergency over the weekend. For the latest, we're joined by our reporter, Chloe. Chloe, what do we know so far?
Good morning, Grace. As of today, June 15th, 2026, Senator McConnell is still in a hospital somewhere in the Washington, D.C. area. He's 84 years old, and he was taken from his home by ambulance on Sunday morning. According to reports from CBS News and the Lexington Herald-Leader, neighbors actually saw him being moved on a stretcher around 9 a.m. Eastern Time yesterday. So this all unfolded just about 24 hours before we came on the air.
Has his team said anything about what actually sent him to the hospital?
Not really, and that's part of what's driving the speculation. His spokesperson, David Popp, put out a short statement saying the senator is, quote, receiving excellent care, end quote. But as of Monday afternoon, Popp has declined to give any details about symptoms, a diagnosis, or when McConnell might be discharged. The Guardian also noted that his representatives didn't respond when asked whether the senator is currently conscious or what prompted the emergency call in the first place.
That silence is striking. Is this part of a bigger pattern with his health?
It really is, Grace. According to NPR, McConnell's mobility has been a growing concern for some time now. He often uses a wheelchair to get around the Capitol, and he frequently relies on staff for assistance. A lot of his unsteady gait traces back to a childhood bout of polio, which left him with a partially paralyzed leg. So even before recent incidents, he was navigating real physical challenges every day on the job.
And there have been some serious episodes just in the last couple of years, right?
Yes, several. Back in February of 2026, just about 4 months ago, he had an 8-day hospital stay for what aides described as flu-like symptoms. In late 2024, he sprained his wrist after a minor fall. But 2023 was really the turning point. As reported by ABC7 New York and CNN, that March he suffered a serious concussion and broken ribs after tripping at a dinner at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Washington, D.C.
I remember that. How long was he sidelined?
He was out of the Senate for 6 weeks and needed intensive inpatient physical therapy to recover. And it didn't stop there. That same year, he also fell during an international trip to Finland, and again while disembarking from a plane back in D.C. So, multiple falls within a single year, on top of the concussion and broken ribs. That's really when his colleagues started raising quieter concerns about his stamina.
And then there were those moments at the microphone that a lot of viewers remember.
Right, the so-called freezing episodes. In July and August of 2023, McConnell had 2 very public incidents where he became unresponsive and froze for roughly 30 seconds during press conferences. The Capitol's attending physician, Dr. Brian P. Monahan, suggested at the time those episodes were due to, quote, occasional lightheadedness, end quote, or dehydration following his concussion. But those moments really fueled a national debate over his fitness for office, and they've never quite gone away from the conversation around him.
That debate eventually pushed him out of leadership, didn't it?
It was a major factor, yes. In November of 2024, McConnell ended his record-breaking run as the Republican leader in the Senate, a post he'd held for nearly 2 decades. He was succeeded by Senator John Thune of South Dakota, and Thune officially became Senate Majority Leader on January 3, 2025. So McConnell has been out of leadership for about 1.5 years at this point, though he's still very much an active senator.
What role does he play now?
According to ABC7 New York, even without a leadership title, McConnell remains an influential senior member. He currently chairs the Senate Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, which is a powerful perch for someone with his experience. And notably, he was still showing up for work right before this hospitalization. He participated in Senate votes as recently as June 11, 2026, which was just 4 days ago.
How has he been getting along with President Trump in this second term?
It's a complicated relationship, Grace. ABC7 New York reported that McConnell has frequently been, quote, at odds, end quote, with the president. But when you actually look at his voting record, it's more nuanced. He's been a note of resistance on personnel decisions, voting against cabinet nominees like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, and Pete Hegseth. So on confirmations, he's pushed back.
But on policy, he's still largely been a team player?
Pretty much. According to the Washington Post, McConnell has voted in alignment with the Trump administration's positions 96% of the time. He also continues his career-long effort to confirm conservative federal judges, which has really been his signature legacy issue. So the headlines about him clashing with Trump are real, but structurally, he's still a very reliable Republican vote on the agenda items that matter most to the party.
Now, this hospitalization is raising big questions about his seat. What's the situation there?
That's right. McConnell announced back in 2025 that he would not seek another 6-year term. So his 41-year career is already scheduled to wrap up in January of 2027, roughly 7 months from now. But this hospitalization has obviously renewed speculation about whether he might have to leave the Senate earlier than planned. And how a vacancy would be filled has actually changed pretty dramatically in Kentucky in just the last couple of years.
Walk us through what's different.
So previously, under Senate Bill 228, passed back in 2021, Governor Andy Beshear would have had to choose a replacement from a list provided by the Republican Party. That kept the seat in GOP hands even with a Democratic governor. But in early 2024, the Kentucky legislature passed House Bill 622, and they overrode a gubernatorial veto to do it. That law changed the rules entirely.
What does the new law actually require?
Under House Bill 622, the governor's power to appoint a temporary successor has been abolished completely. Any vacancy in a U.S. Senate seat from Kentucky now has to be filled through a special election. So no more interim appointee, no more behind-the-scenes party list. The voters have to weigh in directly, which is a significant shift in how this would play out.
And what about the timing? When would that election actually happen?
This is where it gets interesting, Grace. 2026 is already a regular election year for this Senate seat. So if a vacancy were declared now, the special election would likely be held concurrently with the general election already scheduled for November 3rd, 2026. That's a little under 5 months away, so we wouldn't see some hastily organized standalone race. It would fold into the contest that's already on the calendar.
Has any vacancy actually been declared at this point?
No, and that's important to underline. As of Monday afternoon, no Senate vacancy has been declared. We also don't have independent medical confirmation of McConnell's status beyond what his office is saying. The Washington Post and other outlets are reporting that legislative business in the Senate is moving ahead as planned under Majority Leader Thune's direction, so the institution itself is operating normally while everyone waits for more information.
So at this hour, what's the bottom line for our viewers?
The bottom line is that Senator McConnell remains under observation in a D.C. area hospital, and his office is still maintaining only that he is, quote, receiving excellent care, end quote. We don't have a diagnosis, we don't have a timeline for discharge, and we don't know whether this will affect his ability to finish out his term. Given his history, from the polio in childhood to the falls and freezing episodes in 2023 to that 8-day stay this past February, there's a lot of context here. But the nation is essentially waiting for a formal update from his medical team.
Chloe, thanks so much for laying all of that out for us this morning. We'll be watching for any updates throughout the day.
Thanks, Grace. Happy to be here.
Here are some other headlines. Across the pond, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Technology Secretary Liz Kendall are putting the youth on a strict social media diet. They have officially announced a landmark ban on platforms like TikTok, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, and X for anyone under the age of 16. This policy, which mirrors recent Australian legislation, intends to keep kids from being unfollowed by reality, though messaging apps like WhatsApp and YouTube Kids will stay on the menu for now. The government plans to use secondary legislation to bring these rules before Parliament by Christmas, hoping the ban will spring into action by the season of 2027. This digital curfew includes blocking live streaming and stranger-to-child communication for those under 16, with these features disabled by default for 17-year-olds. Even AI chatbots are getting an age check, as those with intimate functionalities are now off-limits for anyone under 18. While 90% of parents are liking this post, Amnesty International suggests the government might be scrolling in the wrong direction, failing to address the underlying design of these platforms. Tech giants could face multi-million-pound fines if they do not play by the rules, though teens themselves will not be punished for trying to hack their way back in. In France, the 52nd G7 summit has kicked off in Evian-les-Bains, where world leaders are trying to peek through a cloud of trade disputes and a shaky peace deal between the United States and Iran. President Trump arrived for the three-day event shortly after announcing a tentative agreement to end the conflict, a breakthrough credited to mediation by Pakistan and Qatar. However, things turned a bit sour when the president renewed threats of 100% tariffs on French wine. Talk about a vintage grievance. This gathering marks French President Emmanuel Macron's final time hosting the club and the first full meeting since the return of the Trump administration in 2025. The guest list features fresh faces like German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and Japan's first female Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. While they discuss maritime transit through the Strait of Hormuz and artificial intelligence, thousands of anti-capitalist protesters are making a scene in nearby Geneva, where police have already stepped in to break up the party. Stateside Georgia Governor Brian Kemp is mapping out a special legislative session starting June 17th. Lawmakers are racing against a July 1st deadline to replace QR codes in vote tabulation, as required by the 2024 law SB 189. They also have to redraw congressional lines after a Supreme Court decision in Louisiana versus Calais weakened certain redistricting protections. Local officials feel like they are being set up for a technical foul, claiming they lack the funds to update their scanning equipment just weeks before the ban. To add to the drama, the state election board is pushing for hand-marked paper ballots for the November general election, a move that is currently out of sync with directives from the Secretary of State's office. Meanwhile, New York City is experiencing a tale of two riots. On June 14th, the No Kings movement held a star-studded rally at the town hall to protest the policies of the administration on the president's 80th birthday. At the same time, the New York Knicks finally won their first NBA title in 53 years, but the championship hoopla devolved into riots in Midtown Manhattan, where fans put a full-court press on local police. Mayor Zohran Mamdani has deployed a heavy security presence to keep the peace, while activists are challenging Governor Kathy Hochul's new laws that ban mask-wearing and restrict protests near houses of worship. Finally, the race for artificial intelligence is hitting a regulatory speed bump. At the G7, President Macron is pitching France as a global hub, while Canada's Mark Carney is calling for stricter safety measures. In Washington, the White House has told the firm Anthropic to take its Fable model offline due to security vulnerabilities, a move that proves some digital stories do not have a happy ending. This follows a June 2nd executive order on innovation, while on Capitol Hill the bipartisan Great American AI Act has been unveiled by Representatives Jay Obernolte and Lori Trahan to create a federal framework. Across the Atlantic, the European Commission confirmed that the August 2, 2026 deadline for chatbot transparency is still set in stone, even as Pentagon Secretary Pete Hegseth reviews autonomous weapons policies. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.